There is a strange moment that happens when you realize you don't want to keep going. Not because you failed, not because you're incapable, not because you don't care. You just don't want to anymore. Maybe it's a hobby, a project, a goal you once cared about, a sport, a class, a job, or a dream that used to feel exciting but now feels like something you're dragging behind you. And when that feeling arrives, the first thought usually isn't, "Is this still what I want?" It's, "What will people think if I stop?" And maybe that's the part nobody talks about. Sometimes we aren't afraid of giving up. We're afraid of looking like someone who gave up. We've been taught that quitting is almost always a bad thing. Don't give up. Keep pushing. Finish what you started. Never quit. They're simple sentences, and sometimes they're good advice. There are moments when the only thing standing between you and something meaningful is the willingness to endure something difficult. But there is a problem with treating persistence as an absolute virtue, because not everything difficult is worth finishing, and not everything unfinished is a failure. Sometimes something is difficult because you're growing, but sometimes something is difficult because you've simply outgrown it. Those aren't the same thing. There is a difference between continuing because something matters to you and continuing because you've already told everyone that you're going to finish. Those two things can look almost identical from the outside. You're still showing up. You're still working. You're still moving forward. But internally, they can feel completely different. One comes from desire. The other comes from pressure. And pressure can be incredibly convincing. It can disguise itself as discipline. It can disguise itself as responsibility. It can even disguise itself as ambition. But sometimes it's just fear. Fear of disappointing people. Fear of admitting that something didn't work. Fear that stopping will somehow make everything you did before meaningless. And maybe most of all, fear that someone will look at you and say, "I knew you couldn't do it." Imagine you're climbing a mountain. You've spent hours walking uphill. Your legs hurt. You're exhausted. You look up and realize there is still a long way to go. So you keep climbing because you've already come this far. But what if you discover that you're climbing the wrong mountain? Would continuing make you more determined, or would it simply make you more lost? We rarely ask ourselves that question. Instead, we look backward. I've already spent so much time on this. I've already put so much effort into it. I've already told everyone about it. I can't stop now. But the time you've spent isn't an argument for spending more. The effort you've already given doesn't create an obligation to give more. And the fact that other people know about your goal doesn't make it their goal. There is something deeply human about wanting our decisions to make sense to other people. We want our lives to tell a coherent story. We want to be able to explain why we started something and why we finished it. We want the ending to justify the beginning. So when we quit, it can feel like we're admitting that the entire story was a mistake. But maybe that's not what quitting means. Maybe it simply means the story changed. Think about all the things you've done in your life that you no longer care about. You probably don't regret every single one. Some things were important for a year. Some were important for a month. Some were important for a single afternoon. And then they weren't. That's normal. We change. Our interests change. Our priorities change. The person who wanted something desperately 2 years ago might not be the same person sitting here today. And yet we sometimes treat our past desires like contracts, as if the person we used to be gets to decide what the person we are now must do. Maybe that's why giving up can feel so uncomfortable. Because when you give up on something, you're not only letting go of the thing. You're letting go of an imagined version of yourself. The person who was going to succeed. The person who was going to become great at it. The person who was going to prove something. The person who was going to make everyone proud. And sometimes that imagined person is harder to let go of than the actual goal. We all create these imaginary futures. We picture ourselves becoming someone, and once we've imagined that person for long enough, they begin to feel real. We start comparing our present selves to them. I'm supposed to be further along. I should have finished by now. I can't stop after coming this far. But that future version of you doesn't exist. They're an idea, a possibility, and you're allowed to change your mind about becoming them. There is also something uncomfortable about disappointing people. Because sometimes the people around us aren't even trying to pressure us. They might genuinely want what's best for us. Your parents might want you to succeed. Your friends might believe in you. Your teachers might expect something from you. Your teammates might depend on you. And when all of these people believe that you're going to continue, stopping can feel like betrayal. Even if nobody says anything, even if nobody gets angry, even if nobody judges you, you can still feel like you're letting them down. And that's where something strange happens. You stop asking, "What do I want?" And you start asking, "What am I supposed to want?" Those are two very different questions. Sometimes we continue not because we're passionate, but because we don't want to have an uncomfortable conversation. We don't want to say, "I don't enjoy this anymore." We don't want to explain, "I thought I wanted this, but I don't." We don't want to hear, "But you were so good at it." Or, "Why would you stop now?" are the sentence that can hurt the most. "I thought you were going to finish." So instead, we keep going. Not because we believe in the destination, but because we're afraid of what happens when we stop walking. There's a difference between movement and progress. You can spend years moving and still not be going anywhere you actually want to go. And sometimes the hardest thing isn't taking another step. It's having the courage to stand still long enough to ask, "Where am I going?" We live in a culture that celebrates endurance. We admire the person who works through exhaustion, the athlete who plays through pain, the student who stays up all night, the entrepreneur who never sleeps, and the person who refuses to quit. And there is something admirable about perseverance. But there is another kind of strength that doesn't get celebrated as often, the strength to say, "This isn't for me anymore." The strength to admit, "I was wrong." The strength to disappoint someone. The strength to walk away from something you once desperately wanted. The strength to accept that your effort doesn't have to continue forever, just because it has already begun. Maybe quitting isn't always the opposite of courage. Sometimes quitting requires courage. Because when you continue, you get to keep telling yourself that the outcome is still possible. As long as you're still working, the dream is still alive. The possibility is still there. You can still imagine the moment when everything finally becomes worth it. But when you stop, you have to face reality. You have to accept that maybe this isn't going to become what you thought it would. And acceptance can hurt more than effort. But here's something we often forget: an ending doesn't erase what came before it. If you spent 3 years learning something, those 3 years still happened. If you practiced a sport for 5 years, you still became the person those 5 years created. If you started a project and never finished it, you still learned from making it. If you tried something and failed, you still became someone who was willing to try. Not everything has to become a success story to have been worthwhile. Maybe we place too much value on completion. We see a finished painting, a completed degree, a championship, a successful business, or a published book, and we think that's what makes all the work worth it. But what about the person you became while doing it? What about the things you learned? The people you met? The moments you experienced? The discipline you developed? The things you discovered about yourself? Those don't disappear because you didn't reach the final checkpoint. An unfinished chapter is still part of the book. And maybe this is where we have to separate two different kinds of giving up. There is giving up because something became difficult, and there is letting go because something no longer belongs in your life. From the outside, they can look identical, but internally, they're completely different. One can feel like surrender. The other can feel like freedom. The challenge is figuring out which one you're experiencing. So maybe the question isn't, should I quit? Maybe the better question is, if nobody else knew what I chose, what would I choose? Imagine that nobody would be disappointed. Nobody would judge you. Nobody would praise you. Nobody would even know. Would you still want to continue? Would you still wake up and choose this? Would you still care about reaching the end? Or would you finally allow yourself to admit that you don't want this anymore? That question can be uncomfortable, because sometimes the answer is, yes, I still want this. I'm just tired. And that's important too, because exhaustion isn't always a reason to quit. Sometimes you don't need a new dream. You need rest. Sometimes the problem isn't the destination, it's the pace. Sometimes you don't need to walk away. You just need to stop running. But sometimes the answer is no, and that's okay too. You are allowed to become someone your past self didn't expect. You're allowed to change your mind. You're allowed to discover that something you once loved isn't something you want anymore. You're allowed to leave. You're allowed to disappoint people. You're allowed to take a different path. And none of that means you are weak. The world may never give you permission to change. There will always be someone who doesn't understand. Someone who says you were so close. Someone who reminds you how much you've already invested. Someone who thinks you should have kept going. But they're not the ones who have to live your life. You are. And eventually, you have to decide whether you're living according to your own values or according to an audience that may not even be watching. Because that's the strange thing about worrying what other people think. We can spend years performing for an audience that isn't paying attention. We imagine people keeping score. We imagine them remembering every failure, every unfinished project, every goal we abandoned, and every time we changed our minds. But most people are too busy living their own lives. They're worried about their own failures, their own insecurities, and their own unfinished stories. And even if they do judge you, they don't have to live with the consequences of your decision. You do. So perhaps the goal isn't to never give up. Maybe the goal is to understand why you're continuing. If you're continuing because you care, keep going. If you're continuing because you're growing, keep going. If you're tired but the thing still matters, rest, then keep going. But if the only thing keeping you moving is fear of looking weak, fear of disappointing someone, fear of admitting you changed, or fear of being seen as a failure, then maybe it's worth stopping for a moment. Not necessarily quitting, just stopping and listening. Ask yourself, if nobody could see this, would I still do it? If nobody praised me for finishing, would I still want to finish? If nobody knew I quit, would I still feel like I had failed? And maybe the most important question, am I doing this because I want my life to look a certain way, or because I actually want to live it this way? We spend so much time trying to become someone worth being proud of. But maybe being proud of yourself isn't always about finishing. Maybe sometimes it's about being honest. Honest enough to admit when you're tired. Honest enough to admit when you were wrong. Honest enough to recognize when something no longer makes you happy. And honest enough to choose a different direction. There will be things in your life that you don't finish. Books, projects, relationships, goals, dreams, and versions of yourself. And maybe that's not something we should be ashamed of. Maybe life isn't a list of things we're supposed to complete. Maybe it's a process of discovering what deserves our time and what doesn't. Some things are meant to be carried for years. Some things are meant to teach us something and then be put down. Some things are meant to end. And some things we haven't finished yet because we're not ready. So if you're standing in front of something difficult right now, don't immediately tell yourself to quit. But don't automatically tell yourself to keep going either. Give yourself a moment where neither choice is required. Step back, take a breath, and ask yourself why you're doing it. Not why you started, not what you promised, not what everyone else expects. Why you still want it. Because there is a difference between giving up on yourself and giving up on something that no longer represents you. One is surrender. The other can be growth. And sometimes, walking away from the wrong path is the first step toward finding the right one. Maybe you don't need to prove that you can finish everything you start. Maybe you just need to learn how to recognize what is worth finishing. Maybe your life doesn't need to look impressive from the outside. Maybe it just needs to feel honest from the inside. And maybe the greatest freedom isn't being able to say, I never gave up. Maybe it's being able to say, I knew when to keep going. I knew when to rest. And I knew when it was time to let go. You don't owe the world a finished version of every dream you've ever had. You owe yourself an honest life. And sometimes an honest life means continuing. Sometimes it means changing direction. And sometimes it means finally giving yourself permission to stop.